According to U.S. News, America spends more than $1 million a minute importing oil from Saudi Arabia. The United States at this time is more than $15 trillion in debt, and the unemployment rate is higher than it has been since World War II. I propose that drilling for oil in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, or ANWR, would address all of these issues and provide a reasonable solution that would be best for our nation. The first problem I mentioned is the national debt is incredibly high. It's actually the highest that it's been since World War II, and it's the first time in history that the national debt has actually been larger than the GDP, or gross domestic product. And the gross domestic product is the sum of all the worth of all the products being produced in the US. So currently, if we sold every single product that we produced this whole year across all the industries in the US, it would actually not be enough money to pay off the national debt. So this is a huge feat. Feasibly, right now, we have no means of paying off the debt that we owe to, frankly, our enemies. Countries like China, primarily, and then of course other hostile countries throughout the Middle East and then some in Europe as well. So what we need to do is come up with a way to produce revenue within the US. There are a couple of different causes for the national debt, one of them being the tax cuts that President Bush made during his presidency, and then of course the healthcare entitlements that have been made by our more recent president, both of which have just cost the government money, and then the rampant spending that the government engages in does not make the situation any better. Now, we also spend lots and lots of money importing oil instead of drilling oil locally. Like I said, we spend $1 million a minute importing oil. Now, part of that is just for the cost of the oil, and part of it's for the travel. But if we could produce oil locally within the United States, it would solve both of these issues in one fell swoop. And of course, things show no sign of getting better. So the solution I propose is to drill in the ANWR, or Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Now, drilling could be done using less than 3% of available land. President Jimmy Carter set aside what he called the North Slope, which is actually just a small 500 acres of land. Now, if you think about it, 500 acres sounds like a lot, but if you consider that there are 19 million acres set aside in Alaska for ANWR, 500 acres is actually less than 3% of the available property. In addition, advances in technology have made it possible where you can actually drill for oil with a pretty low environmental impact. One oil derrick can actually cover 28,000 square feet of land, which is enormous. It just, of course, drills underground, so there's no actual effects on the outer land at all. And just to kind of put things in perspective, 28,000 miles of land is larger than Washington, D.C. And then, of course, in addition to that, the government, whether or not we're drilling here locally or abroad, is still going to enforce all of their strict safety measures. If we decide to launch an oil drilling program in ANWR, the EPA and other environmental protection organizations are not going to throw their legislation out the window. They're still going to make sure that anything is done is well sanctioned and well protected, as it should be. Now, how does this solve the problem? It addresses the issues actually in several different ways. One of the biggest ways is that American drilling in ANWR would actually produce tens of thousands of American jobs. Each oil derrick employs up to 150 men per shift, and of course they work 24 hours, so it's at least 3 or 4 shifts a day. Now, if you factor that in, that is a lot of new jobs being created simply by putting up the oil derricks, not to mention the people needed to maintain them, build them individually, and then expand the operation as need be. In addition to that, the oil could actually produce $296 billion a year in revenue for the United States government. So not only are we creating jobs and saving money by not having to bring the oil from Saudi Arabia or wherever we're buying it from, we are actually making money off the oil by selling it straight from the source to the American citizens. Essentially, we're cutting out the middleman. And what that does is produce, like I said, up to $296 billion in revenue. Now, this is still less than the national debt. But that would put the national debt below the GDP, which would be a good thing. It'd be a step in the right direction. And over the course of several years, it could certainly be something that could take a huge chunk out of the debt, if not pay it off altogether. And one of the other most important points, of course, is that it would make us independent from our enemies. So, right now we rely on Saudi Arabia, which is a Muslim country. They're a hostile country for all of our oil. And of course, the oil is the lifeblood of America, our manufacturing, our military, our private jobs, and even our cars that we drive every day. So, without that, it can really be an issue for us. We're moving in the right direction. We're trying to make steps to avoid having to be so reliant on oil. But most of the electric cars and things like that we're buying are coming from foreign countries anyways. So we're importing a substance to solve our problem either way, whether or not it's from Japan and Finland with the electric cars or Saudi Arabia with the oil. I propose that what we should do is find a domestic solution to the problem, like drilling in ANWR. So what happens if we do drill? I say that number one, America will be totally independent in 10 years. It will be independent financially from its debtors, mainly China, and will also be independent from Saudi Arabia. And of course, most importantly, America will be financially stable. We'll have enough jobs to support all the people who are out of work right now. I don't think we'll ever get to a point where we have a 0% unemployment rate, but we can certainly lower it from where it is now, that being the highest point ever. And I'd love to see the dollar gain value. I think that as America began producing her own oil, becoming financially independent, paying off her debts, employing its citizens, the dollar would finally begin to gain value again, and we would gain solvency in foreign markets. And if we don't do it, what I suspect is going to happen is that America will actually default on her debts. Now that's a huge problem because eventually people are going to stop lending us money. And if we don't have the money to pay them back, then we're going to get to that point when they just simply don't have any more money to give us or are unwilling to give us any more money. And at that point, America's system is just going to crash down. When we don't have any more money, Saudi Arabia is going to stop selling us oil because we simply won't have any money to buy it. And at that point, I think what it's going to lead to is anarchy. Without oil, the military cannot function. And without a military, we cannot protect ourselves from A, our Chinese debtors who we've defaulted on, and B, Saudi Arabia and all the other Middle Eastern countries who have been our enemies for years will actually see this as an opportunity to attack. After all the dust settles, there won't be any American government left, and the people that are left, of course, won't have any oil or anything to drive anywhere, but at the very least will not have any kind of system of government or any means of making any money. All of the issues I've mentioned are not easily solved, and certainly it would not be something that would happen overnight. But I think I presented a reasonable solution that could perhaps fairly shortly actually solve a lot of the issues that our country is facing right now. I think it's something that would take a lot of work and something that would certainly need just a little bit of time to get put together, but I think it's something that would really, really help. So I think if we did drill for oil in the Alaskan National Wildlife Refuge, it would definitely be something that would be very beneficial to our country. It would help the unemployment rate, it would help our national debt, and it would help us not to be reliant on our enemies. Thank you.